The Registered Behavior Technician exam, 132 practice questions with answers and explanations, covering all 6 areas of the RBT task list: measurement, assessment, skill acquisition, behavior reduction, documentation, and professional conduct. After each question, pause and pick your answer before the reveal. Let's begin. Question 1. An RBT gives the instruction, "Put on your shoes." The client eventually complies, but the supervisor is concerned about how long the client takes to begin responding after an instruction is delivered. Which measure best captures that concern? A. The duration of the response. B. Interresponse time. C. Latency. D. The frequency of responses.
The answer is C. Latency. Latency is the time that elapses between the antecedent event here, the instruction, and the beginning of the response. So it is the measure that answers how long before the client starts. Duration times one instance from onset to offset, and interresponse time measures from the end of one response to the start of the next, so neither one isolates the delay after an instruction.
Question 2. A client takes bites of food, one right after another, with almost no pause between them. The supervisor wants a measure of how much time passes between the end of one bite and the beginning of the next. Which measurement procedure should the RBT use? A. Latency. B. Whole interval recording. C. The duration of each bite. D. Interresponse time.
The answer is D. Interresponse time. Interresponse time is defined as the time from the end of one response to the onset of the next response, which is exactly the pacing question the supervisor asked.
Question 3. A client's tantrums have not changed in number from week to week, but the RBT notices that some episodes last only seconds while others go on much longer, and the supervisor wants to know whether episodes are becoming shorter. Which measure best answers that question? A. Permanent product recording. B. Duration. C. Latency. D. Frequency.
The answer is B. Duration. Duration measures the time from the onset to the offset of each episode, so it is the only one of these measures that can detect episodes getting shorter while their number stays the same.
Question 4. An RBT writes hand raising 12 on the data sheet but does not record how long the observation lasted. Why is this a problem? A. A count may only be reported as a percentage of intervals. B. Hand raising must always be measured with whole interval recording. C. Without the length of the observation period, the count cannot be converted to a rate, so it cannot be meaningfully compared with other sessions. D. Counting samples behavior rather than recording it, so counts are never reported alone.
The answer is C. Without the length of the observation period, the count cannot be converted to a rate, so it cannot be meaningfully compared with other sessions. A raw count only becomes interpretable when it is paired with the time over which it was collected, because rate is count divided by observation time.
Question 5. A supervisor asks an RBT to record 2 things: the time from the moment a timer sounds until the client begins washing his hands, and the time from the end of one instance of hand flapping until the beginning of the next instance. Which 2 continuous measures has the supervisor requested in that order? A. Latency, then interresponse time. B. Interresponse time, then duration. C. Duration, then latency. D. Latency, then duration.
The answer is A. Latency, then interresponse time. The first request runs from an antecedent event to the onset of a response, which is latency. The second runs from the offset of one response to the onset of the next, which is interresponse time.
Question 6. An RBT is told to divide the session into equal intervals and to score an interval as an occurrence if the behavior happens at any point during that interval. Compared with recording the behavior continuously, What will these data most likely do? A. Match a continuous record exactly. B. Tend to overestimate how much of the session the behavior actually occupied. C. Bear no relationship at all to how often the behavior occurred. D. Tend to underestimate how much of the session the behavior actually occupied.
The answer is B. Tend to overestimate how much of the session the behavior actually occupied. This is partial interval recording, in which a single brief occurrence causes the entire interval to be scored, so the summary credits the behavior with time it did not actually occupy.
Question 7. A supervisor wants on-task behavior measured so that an interval is scored as an occurrence only if the client is on task for the entire interval. What should the RBT expect from the resulting data? A. They will tend to underestimate time on task. B. They will overestimate time on task. C. They will be unaffected by how long each interval is. D. They will exactly match a continuous duration record.
The answer is A. They will tend to underestimate time on task. This is whole interval recording. The behavior must last from the start of the interval to its end, so any brief pause makes the whole interval score as non-occurrence and real engagement is underreported.
Question 8. An RBT is running a group activity and can only glance up briefly at set times. The supervisor asks her to look at the client at the end of each interval and record whether the behavior is happening at that instant. Which procedure is being described? A. Partial interval recording. B. Permanent product recording. C. Whole interval recording. D. Momentary time sampling.
The answer is D. Momentary time sampling. Momentary time sampling scores only whether the behavior is occurring at the single moment the interval ends, which is what allows the RBT to keep teaching between observations.
Question 9. A supervisor wants an estimate of how much of a session a client spends engaged in an ongoing, continuous behavior, but the RBT must keep teaching and cannot record every instance. Which sampling method is least likely to systematically overestimate or underestimate that behavior? A. Partial interval recording. B. Whole interval recording. C. Latency recording. D. Momentary time sampling.
The answer is D. Momentary time sampling. Momentary time sampling neither credits a whole interval for one brief occurrence, as partial interval does, nor discards an interval because of one brief pause, as whole interval does. So for ongoing behavior, it carries the least systematic bias of the interval methods.
Question 10. Which target behavior is best suited to permanent product recording? A. Vocal stereotypy during free play. B. Remaining attentive during a group lesson. C. The number of math problems the client completes on a worksheet. D. Attempts to leave the classroom.
The answer is C. The number of math problems the client completes on a worksheet. Permanent product recording measures the lasting tangible outcome a behavior leaves behind, so it works only when the behavior produces something that can be counted afterwards, such as completed worksheet items.
Question 11. An RBT measures bed making by inspecting the bed after the client leaves the room. The parent mentions that she sometimes finishes the bed herself when the client is slow. What is the main measurement concern? A. Permanent product recording requires the RBT to observe the behavior as it happens. B. Permanent product recording requires the RBT to time each interval. C. Permanent product recording may only be used for academic tasks. D. The product may not have been produced by the client's own behavior, so the data may not reflect what the client actually did.
The answer is D. The product may not have been produced by the client's own behavior, so the data may not reflect what the client actually did. Permanent product measurement is valid only when the product was produced by the client's own target behavior. If another person can contribute to or complete the product, the record no longer measures the client's responding.
Question 12. An RBT graphs 3 baseline sessions followed by 5 intervention sessions on the same line graph. How should the graph be constructed at the point where the intervention began? A. Connect the last baseline point to the first intervention point so that the data path stays continuous. B. Draw a vertical phase change line between the conditions and do not connect data points across it. C. Plot the session numbers on the vertical axis so that the change is easier to see. D. Start an entirely new graph for the intervention data.
The answer is B. Draw a vertical phase change line between the conditions and do not connect data points across it. Data paths are broken at a phase change line because connecting them would imply that the points were collected under one unchanged set of conditions.
Question 13. On a behavior-analytic line graph, what does a vertical phase change line tell the reader? A. That the data on either side were collected by different observers. B. That the client met the mastery criterion at that point. C. That the behavior changed at that point. D. That the condition in effect changed at that point.
The answer is D. That the condition in effect changed at that point. A phase change line marks only that the conditions in effect changed, for example from baseline to intervention.
Question 14. Which of the following target definitions is written in observable and measurable terms? A. The client drops to the floor and screams louder than conversational volume. B. The client is defiant toward adult instructions. C. The client seeks attention during group activities. D. The client becomes frustrated when demands are placed.
The answer is A. The client drops to the floor and screams louder than conversational volume. An operational definition must be objective and complete enough that two people reading it independently would count the same events.
Question 15. An RBT is asked to review 4 proposed target behaviors. Which one fails the dead man's test and therefore is not written as a behavior? A. Raising a hand. B. Not talking during silent reading. C. Walking to the sink. D. Handing a picture card to an adult.
The answer is B. Not talking during silent reading. The dead man's test says that if a dead person can do it, it is not behavior.
Question 16. An RBT records 20 occurrences of hand raising during a 40-minute session. The supervisor asks for the rate per hour. What should the RBT report? A. 0, 5 per hour. B. 20 per hour. C. 30 per hour. D. 40 per hour.
The answer is C. 30 per hour. Rate is the count divided by observation time, expressed in the unit the supervisor requested. 20 responses in 40 minutes is 0, 5 per minute, and 0. 5 multiplied by 60 gives 30 per hour.
Question 17. During one session, a client had 4 tantrum episodes, and the recorded durations totaled 12 minutes. What is the mean duration per episode? A. 12 minutes. B. 48 minutes. C. 4 minutes. D. 3 minutes.
The answer is D. 3 minutes. Mean duration is total duration divided by the number of occurrences. So 12 minutes divided by 4 episodes is 3 minutes per episode.
Question 18. Aggression is targeted for reduction. Over the last 10 sessions, the graph data have moved steadily downward, with the points staying close to that downward path from session to session. How should the RBT describe this data path when reporting to the supervisor? A. An increasing trend with low variability. B. A decreasing trend with low variability. C. A change in level with no trend. D. A flat trend with high variability.
The answer is B. A decreasing trend with low variability. Trend describes the direction of the data path, and variability describes how much the points bounce around it. So a steady downward path with tightly clustered points is a decreasing trend with low variability.
Question 19. The percentage of correct responses on a skill the client is learning has declined across 6 consecutive sessions. What is the most appropriate action for the RBT? A. Explain to the family what the decline means for the client's progress. B. Continue collecting and graphing the data accurately and report the declining trend to the supervisor promptly. C. Change the prompting procedure to reverse the decline. D. Stop graphing the program until the data improve.
The answer is B. Continue collecting and graphing the data accurately and report the declining trend to the supervisor promptly. Noticing and describing a trend is part of the RBT's data collection role, but deciding what it means and what to do about it is the supervising behavior analyst's decision.
Question 20. An RBT is very busy during sessions, so instead of recording as the behavior occurs, she writes down her best recollection of the counts at the end of the day. What is the primary risk of this practice? A. Data reconstructed from memory may not accurately reflect what occurred, and the supervisor may then make clinical decisions based on inaccurate data. B. There is no real risk as long as the totals are close to what happened. C. It only becomes a problem when duration, rather than count, is being measured. D. It only matters on days when a second observer is also collecting data.
The answer is A. Data reconstructed from memory may not accurately reflect what occurred, and the supervisor may then make clinical decisions based on inaccurate data. Data are only useful to the degree they are an accurate record of what the client actually did, and memory at the end of a day systematically loses and distorts occurrences.
Question 21. A fire drill interrupts a session and no data were collected for one of the client's programs. What should the RBT do? A. Carry the previous session's data forward so the graph has no gap. B. Leave the data cell blank, note why data were not collected, and inform the supervisor. C. Estimate a value based on what the client usually does. D. Record 0 occurrences for that program.
The answer is B. Leave the data cell blank, note why data were not collected, and inform the supervisor. No observation took place, so no value was obtained. Recording a 0 would falsely assert that the behavior was observed and did not occur, and estimating or copying forward invents data that were never collected.
Question 22. A material required by a written teaching protocol is missing, so an RBT delivers the procedure a different way for the whole session and does not mention it to anyone. What is the most significant risk of doing this? A. The procedure was not delivered as written, so the data no longer reflect the program as designed, and the supervisor may draw the wrong conclusion about whether it works. B. The session's data automatically become a permanent product measure. C. Procedural fidelity matters only during assessment, so nothing is affected. D. The RBT must now redraw the graph with a new phase change line.
The answer is A. The procedure was not delivered as written, so the data no longer reflect the program as designed, and the supervisor may draw the wrong conclusion about whether it works. Procedural fidelity means the protocol is delivered exactly as written. When implementation drifts, the resulting data describes some other procedure while still being graphed as if they describe the program.
Question 23. A technician places 5 preferred items in an array in front of a learner, lets the learner choose one and have brief access to it, then removes the chosen item from the array, rearranges the remaining items, and repeats the procedure until no items are left. Which preference assessment format is described? A. Multiple stimulus with replacement. B. Free operant observation. C. Paired stimulus forced choice. D. Multiple stimulus without replacement.
The answer is D. Multiple stimulus without replacement. The defining feature is that the selected item is taken out of the array and not returned, so each successive selection is made from a smaller set. The order in which items are chosen, therefore, produces a complete preference ranking.
Question 24. A supervisor asks a technician to explain how the with replacement and without replacement versions of a multiple stimulus preference assessment differ. Which statement is accurate? A. In the with replacement version, the learner may select 2 items per trial, while in the without replacement version, only 1. B. In the with replacement version, engagement is timed, while in the without replacement version, selections are counted. C. In the with replacement version, items are presented one at a time, while in the without replacement version, they are presented in pairs. D. In the with replacement version, the selected item is returned to the array before the next trial, while in the without replacement version, it is removed.
The answer is D. In the with replacement version, the selected item is returned to the array before the next trial, while in the without replacement version, it is removed. Replacement refers only to what happens to the chosen item between trials.
Question 25. While running a paired stimulus force choice preference assessment, a technician notices she has been placing the newer toy on the learner's right side on every trial. Why does the protocol call for alternating which side each item is placed on? A. To ensure each item is presented the same number of times as every other item. B. To keep the learner from becoming satiated on either item. C. To control for side position bias, so that selections reflect the item chosen rather than the location reached toward. D. To make the assessment take fewer trials overall.
The answer is C. To control for side position bias, so that selections reflect the item chosen rather than the location reached toward. Some learners reliably reach to one side regardless of what is there, so if an item always sits on that side, its selection score is inflated.
Question 26. A learner screams and drops to the floor whenever a preferred item is taken away from him. The supervising behavior analyst wants a low-demand first look at what the learner likes. Which preference assessment format best fits this situation, and what is measured? A. Paired stimulus, in which 2 items are offered at a time and selections are counted. B. Multiple stimulus without replacement, in which each chosen item is removed and selection order is recorded. C. Single stimulus, in which 1 item at a time is presented and approach is recorded. D. Free operant observation, in which all items stay available and the duration of engagement with each is recorded.
The answer is D. Free operant observation, in which all items stay available and the duration of engagement with each is recorded. Free operant observation never removes or restricts an item and places no demands on the learner, so it avoids evoking the problem behavior that item removal triggers.
Question 27. A learner has significant motor and communication limitations and cannot scan or reach toward 2 objects placed side by side. Her behavior analyst directs the technician to present 1 item at a time and record whether the learner approaches, engages with, or turns away from it. What does this format yield? A. An indication of whether each item is approached, but not a ranking of the items relative to one another. B. Confirmation that the approached items will function as reinforcers. C. A precise ranking of every item from most to least preferred. D. The duration of engagement with all items presented simultaneously.
The answer is A. An indication of whether each item is approached, but not a ranking of the items relative to one another. Presenting items one at a time asks only whether that single item is approached, which gives an absolute rather than a relative measure. Learners often approach nearly everything, so the results tend not to discriminate among items.
Question 28. A behavior analyst needs a full ranking of 5 potential reinforcers before the next session and has very little session time available. Which preference assessment format should the technician be assigned to run? A. Free operant observation, because engagement duration ranks items faster than selections do. B. Multiple stimulus without replacement, because the order of selections ranks the whole set in about as many selections as there are items. C. Single stimulus, because presenting items one at a time takes the least time per item. D. Paired stimulus, because pairing every item with every other item is the quickest way to rank a set.
The answer is B. Multiple stimulus without replacement, because the order of selections ranks the whole set in about as many selections as there are items. Because each chosen item is removed, the sequence of choices is itself the hierarchy, so one pass through the array ranks every item.
Question 29. After completing a preference assessment, a technician reports that one toy was selected on every opportunity. What may the technician correctly conclude from this result? A. That the toy will maintain any behavior it is delivered after. B. That the toy is a reinforcer for this learner. C. That the toy is a highly preferred item and is likely, but not proven, to function as a reinforcer. D. That the toy should replace the reinforcers listed in the learner's current program.
The answer is C. That the toy is a highly preferred item and is likely, but not proven, to function as a reinforcer. A preference assessment identifies what a learner chooses. It does not test any effect on behavior.
Question 30. Midway through a session, the item that ranked highest on the morning's preference assessment stops producing any change in the learners responding. What should the technician do? A. Continue implementing the program as written and report the ineffective item to the supervising behavior analyst promptly. B. Select a different item from the classroom and use it as the reinforcer for the rest of the session. C. Record the session as invalid and end it early. D. Increase the amount of the item delivered until the learner responds again.
The answer is A. Continue implementing the program as written and report the ineffective item to the supervising behavior analyst promptly. A preferred item can lose its effect for reasons such as satiation or a change in motivating conditions, and deciding what to do about that is a program decision.
Question 31. A technician wants to establish whether a preferred snack actually strengthens a learner's hand-raising. Who conducts that evaluation and why? A. The technician, since she already ran the preference assessment that produced the snack. B. Either the technician or the caregiver, as long as the result is written in the session note. C. The learner's caregiver, who knows the learner's likes best. D. The supervising behavior analyst, who designs and interprets reinforcer assessments. The technician collects data as directed.
The answer is D. The supervising behavior analyst, who designs and interprets reinforcer assessments. The technician collects data as directed. Demonstrating that a stimulus functions as a reinforcer requires arranging it contingently and evaluating the resulting change in behavior, which is an assessment design and interpretation task.
Question 32. A learner's program calls for a brief preference assessment before most sessions rather than one assessment at intake. What is the behavioral rationale for repeating it? A. Preferences shift over time and with changing motivating conditions, so an old ranking may no longer identify effective items. B. Repeating the assessment teaches the learner to make choices more quickly. C. A single assessment cannot be documented in the clinical record. D. Repetition is what converts a preferred item into a reinforcer.
The answer is A. Preferences shift over time and with changing motivating conditions, so an old ranking may no longer identify effective items. What a learner values depends on current conditions such as recent access, deprivation, illness, or simple novelty wearing off, and those conditions change from day to day.
Question 33. A technician is scheduled to run a preference assessment involving several food items, but the learner has just finished a large lunch. What is the most appropriate action? A. Withhold the learner's next snack, so the food items regain their value. B. Note the recent meal and consult the supervisor about timing, because recent consumption can temporarily lower the value of food items and distort the results. C. Run the assessment as scheduled and note in the record that the results are probably accurate anyway. D. Substitute toys for the food items so the assessment can proceed on schedule.
The answer is B. Note the recent meal and consult the supervisor about timing, because recent consumption can temporarily lower the value of food items and distort the results. Satiation temporarily reduces the value of a consumable, so items assessed right after a meal can be ranked far below their usual position, and the resulting hierarchy will mislead.
Question 34. A behavior analyst gathers information about a learner's screaming by interviewing the parent and having two teachers complete written rating scales about when the screaming occurs. No one observes the learner. Which kind of functional assessment is this? A. Descriptive assessment, because the informants describe the behavior in detail. B. Indirect assessment, which relies on informants' reports rather than direct observation. C. Functional analysis, because conditions are compared across informants. D. Reinforcer assessment, because the reports identify what the learner gains.
The answer is B. Indirect assessment, which relies on informants' reports rather than direct observation. Indirect methods collect information about behavior from people who have seen it rather than from the observer's own contact with the behavior, which makes them fast but dependent on memory and opinion.
Question 35. A technician's antecedent-behavior-consequence records show that a learner's hitting was followed by an adult reprimand in most recorded episodes. What is the correct interpretation of this record? A. It shows that reprimands are punishing the hitting. B. It qualifies as a functional analysis because environmental events were recorded. C. It establishes that the hitting is maintained by adult attention. D. It shows a correlation between hitting and adult attention and suggests a hypothesis, but it does not establish the function of the hitting.
The answer is D. It shows a correlation between hitting and adult attention and suggests a hypothesis, but it does not establish the function of the hitting. Descriptive recording captures what happened in the natural environment without changing anything, so events that regularly co-occur with the behavior may or may not be maintaining it.
Question 36. Why is an experimental functional analysis the only functional assessment method that can demonstrate the function of a behavior? A. Because it records behavior in the setting where the behavior naturally occurs. B. Because antecedents and consequences are deliberately arranged and compared across conditions, so differences in responding can be attributed to those variables. C. Because it uses longer observation periods than descriptive methods do. D. Because it is conducted by a behavior analyst rather than a technician.
The answer is B. Because antecedents and consequences are deliberately arranged and compared across conditions, so differences in responding can be attributed to those variables. Function is a causal claim, and a causal claim requires manipulating the suspected variable while holding others comparable.
Question 37. During one condition of a functional analysis, the learner has free access to preferred items and to adult attention, and no demands are placed. What is the purpose of this condition? A. It tests whether the behavior is maintained by access to tangible items. B. It is a break period inserted so the learner does not become fatigued. C. It serves as the control, providing a comparison in which the behavior is expected to occur at low levels because nothing is withheld and nothing is demanded. D. It tests whether the behavior is maintained by escape from demands.
The answer is C. It serves as the control, providing a comparison in which the behavior is expected to occur at low levels because nothing is withheld and nothing is demanded. The control condition removes every consequence the test conditions manipulate, so it shows what the behavior looks like when no reinforcer is available for it.
Question 38. A technician is assigned to run the attention condition of a functional analysis exactly as written. Appear busy, deliver a brief statement of concern contingent on the target behavior, and otherwise withhold attention. Partway through, the learner engages appropriately with a toy and looks up. What should the technician do? A. Add a demand to see whether the behavior changes. B. Stop the condition and record that the learner was not engaging in the target behavior. C. Continue the condition as written, withholding attention, because attention must be delivered only for the target behavior for the comparison to be valid. D. Praise the appropriate play, since reinforcing appropriate behavior is always correct.
The answer is C. Continue the condition as written, withholding attention, because attention must be delivered only for the target behavior for the comparison to be valid. In this condition, attention is the manipulated variable, so delivering it at any other moment contaminates the comparison, and the resulting data cannot be interpreted.
Question 39. A technician records that a learner rocks and hums at a steady rate when he is alone in a room with no materials, no demands, and no one interacting with him, and at a similar rate when others are present. Which function does this pattern suggest? A. Access to tangibles, because the behavior continues without materials. B. Automatic sensory reinforcement, because the behavior persists with no social consequence available. C. Escape, because being alone removes demands. D. Attention, because the behavior is noticeable to others.
The answer is B. Automatic sensory reinforcement, because the behavior persists with no social consequence available. Attention, escape, and tangible functions all depend on another person delivering or removing something, so behavior maintained by them typically drops when no one is available to respond.
Question 40. A teacher says, "Time to start your worksheet," and places the worksheet on the desk. The student sweeps the papers onto the floor. The teacher picks up the papers and tells the student to take a few minutes in the calm corner. In this episode, what is the antecedent? A. The teacher's instruction to start the worksheet and the placement of the worksheet on the desk. B. Sweeping the papers onto the floor. C. Being sent to the calm corner. D. The teacher picking the papers up off the floor.
The answer is A. The teacher's instruction to start the worksheet and the placement of the worksheet on the desk. The antecedent is the environmental event that occurs immediately before the behavior and sets the occasion for it. Here, the presentation of the task.
Question 41. During free play, a peer takes the tablet a learner is holding. The learner hits the peer on the arm. An adult tells the peer to give the tablet back, and the learner resumes watching a video. Which part of this episode is the consequence, and what function does it suggest? A. The return of the tablet, which suggests a possible tangible function. B. The peer taking the tablet, which suggests a possible escape function. C. The adult speaking to the peer, which suggests a possible attention function for the learner. D. Hitting the peer, which suggests a possible automatic function.
The answer is A. The return of the tablet, which suggests a possible tangible function. The consequence is what immediately follows the behavior, and here the hitting was immediately followed by regaining the tablet. a pattern consistent with access to a tangible item.
Question 42. Which entry on an antecedent-behavior-consequence data sheet is written appropriately for the behavior column? A. Became angry about the transition. B. Screamed and dropped to the floor. C. Was trying to get out of the activity. D. Had a meltdown because he was overwhelmed.
The answer is B. Screamed and dropped to the floor. Behavior entries must describe what an observer could see and count, so that two people watching the same episode would write the same thing.
Question 43. A technician is administering a skill assessment probe as directed by the supervisor. She presents the instruction, and the learner sits silently without responding. What should the technician do? A. Record no response and move to the next item as the protocol specifies, without prompting or correcting. B. Score the item as correct, since the learner has performed it before. C. Repeat the instruction with an added hint until the learner responds. D. Provide a gentle physical prompt so the learner has a chance to succeed.
The answer is A. Record no response and move to the next item as the protocol specifies, without prompting or correcting. A probe is meant to measure what the learner does without help, so any prompt, hint, or correction changes what is being measured and makes the data unusable for planning.
Question 44. After a technician finishes several sessions of descriptive data collection, the learner's father asks, "So what is causing the tantrums? What should we change at home?" How should the technician respond? A. Share her best guess about the cause, so the family can start making changes right away. B. Describe what she observed in objective terms and explain that the supervising behavior analyst reviews the data and discusses conclusions and any home recommendations. C. Suggest a strategy she has seen work with other learners while the analysis is completed. D. Tell the father the data are confidential and that she cannot discuss the sessions with him at all.
The answer is B. Describe what she observed in objective terms and explain that the supervising behavior analyst reviews the data and discusses conclusions and any home recommendations. Reporting what was observed is within the technician's role, while identifying causes and recommending changes are interpretation and program design, which belong to the supervising behavior analyst.
Question 45. A client's plan teaches him to hand a break card to the RBT during work tasks. Each time he hands over the card, the RBT removes the worksheet for a short break. Over several weeks, handing the card has become much more frequent. Which principle accounts for the increase? A. Punishment, because the work task was taken away from him. B. Extinction, because the worksheet no longer produces responding. C. Negative reinforcement, because removing the work task made handing the card increase. D. Positive reinforcement, because a break card was added to the session materials.
The answer is C. Negative reinforcement, because removing the work task made handing the card increase. Reinforcement is defined by its effect on future behavior, not by whether the consequence seems pleasant.
Question 46. During discrete trial teaching, a learner answers correctly, but the RBT first finishes writing on the data sheet and delivers the token about 8 seconds later. Correct responding has become inconsistent. What should the RBT change? A. Withhold the token after the next, several correct responses to build resistance to extinction. B. Deliver the token immediately after the correct response, then record the data. C. Save all the tokens and deliver a large reward at the end of the session instead. D. Repeat the instruction until the learner answers a second time.
The answer is B. Deliver the token immediately after the correct response, then record the data. Reinforcement is most effective when it follows the target response immediately, because the contingency between that response and the consequence stays clear.
Question 47. A skill has been mastered, and the supervisor wants responding to persist even through long stretches without reinforcement. Which schedule generally produces the highest, steadiest rate of responding and the greatest resistance to extinction? A fixed ratio schedule, in which reinforcement follows a set number of responses. B, continuous reinforcement, in which every response is reinforced. C, a variable ratio schedule, in which reinforcement follows an unpredictable number of responses. D, a fixed interval schedule, in which the first response after a set time is reinforced.
The answer is C, a variable ratio schedule, in which reinforcement follows an unpredictable number of responses. On a variable ratio schedule, the learner cannot discriminate which response will produce reinforcement, so responding stays high and steady and does not drop off quickly when reinforcement is unavailable.
Question 48. An RBT is introducing a brand new labeling target. The written plan calls for reinforcing every correct response at this stage of teaching. Which statement best explains this arrangement? A, continuous reinforcement is used because it makes a response maximally resistant to extinction. B, continuous reinforcement is used whenever the learner seems to enjoy the reinforcer. C, continuous reinforcement should be replaced with an intermittent schedule as soon as the learner responds correctly one time. D, continuous reinforcement strengthens a new response quickly during acquisition. The schedule is thinned later to support maintenance.
The answer is D. Continuous reinforcement strengthens a new response quickly during acquisition. The schedule is thinned later to support maintenance. Dense, continuous reinforcement is the standard arrangement, while a skill is being acquired, because every correct response contacts the contingency, and the new response strengthens rapidly.
Question 49. A client normally works hard for crackers. Today, the caregiver reports he ate a large bowl of crackers right before the session, and crackers no longer maintain his responding. Which best accounts for this? A, satiation has temporarily reduced the value of crackers as a reinforcer. B, crackers were never a reinforcer, so his responding is now under extinction. C, deprivation has temporarily increased the value of crackers as a reinforcer. D, the crackers have become a conditioned reinforcer through pairing.
The answer is A. Satiation has temporarily reduced the value of crackers as a reinforcer. Motivating operations change the momentary value of a consequence.
Question 50. Which of the following is best classified as a conditioned secondary reinforcer? A, water for a learner who has not had a drink all morning. B, food for a learner who has not eaten since breakfast. C, warmth for a learner who has just come in from the cold. D, behavior-specific praise delivered by the RBT.
The answer is D. Behavior-specific praise delivered by the RBT. Unconditioned reinforcers such as food, water, and warmth function without any learning history.
Question 51. An RBT is starting services with a new client who moves away whenever the RBT comes near and cries when materials are placed on the table. Consistent with the plan's pairing procedures, what should the RBT do first? A, sit apart and record data only, and tell the caregiver the client is not ready for teaching. B, deliver preferred items and enjoyable interaction without placing demands, so the RBT becomes associated with reinforcement. C, present the first instruction right away and physically prompt the client through it. D, withhold all preferred items until the client complies with an instruction.
The answer is B. Deliver preferred items and enjoyable interaction without placing demands, so the RBT becomes associated with reinforcement. Pairing works by repeatedly presenting a neutral stimulus. Here the RBT and the teaching setting, together with established reinforcers delivered without demands, until the RBT becomes a conditioned reinforcer.
Question 52. In discrete trial teaching, what is the function of the intertrial interval? A. It is a brief pause that separates the consequence of one trial from the instruction of the next, keeping trials distinct. B. It is the time the learner is allowed to respond after the instruction is delivered. C. It is the delay inserted between the instruction and the prompt, so the learner can respond independently. D. It is the period during which the reinforcer is consumed and praise is delivered.
The answer is A. It is a brief pause that separates the consequence of one trial from the instruction of the next, keeping trials distinct. The intertrial interval is the short break between the end of one trial and the instruction that starts the next, and it keeps each trial a discrete learning unit rather than one long blur of instructions.
Question 53. During free play, a child pulls the bubble jar toward the RBT. The RBT holds the jar, waits, prompts the word bubbles, and blows bubbles when the child says it. Which teaching arrangement is described? A. Naturalistic incidental teaching, because the episode was learner-initiated and the reinforcer was the item requested. B. Discrimination training, because the child chose the bubbles instead of another toy. C. Total task chaining, because blowing bubbles involves several steps. D. Discrete trial teaching, because a prompt was delivered before the response.
The answer is A. Naturalistic incidental teaching, because the episode was learner-initiated and the reinforcer was the item requested. Naturalistic teaching is embedded in the learner's ongoing activity, follows the learner's lead, and uses the natural reinforcer directly related to the response, so asking for bubbles produces bubbles.
Question 54. A plan targets manding for open. Which arrangement best contrives a motivating operation for that mand? A. Place a preferred snack inside a clear container. The child cannot open and keep it in sight. B. Give the child free access to the already open snack container before the trial. C. Say the word open every few minutes during an activity the child dislikes. D. Ask, "What do you want?" repeatedly at the table with no items present.
The answer is A. Place a preferred snack inside a clear container the child cannot open and keep it in sight. A mand is evoked by a motivating operation, so the teaching arrangement must make the item momentarily valuable and make the learner's own response the way to get it.
Question 55. A supervisor selects backward chaining to teach a task-analyzed dressing routine. Which is the strongest rationale for that choice? A. The learner is taught the first step to criterion before any further step is added. B. The learner performs the final step and therefore contacts the natural reinforcer of task completion on every trial. C. It removes the need to write a task analysis at all. D. The learner attempts every step of the chain in every session, with prompting as needed.
The answer is B. The learner performs the final step and therefore contacts the natural reinforcer of task completion on every trial. In backward chaining, the instructor completes the earlier steps and the learner independently performs the last step. So the trial always ends with the learner producing the completed outcome and contacting the natural reinforcer.
Question 56. An RBT teaches hand washing by having the learner independently turn on the water while the RBT completes all the remaining steps. Once turning on the water meets criterion, the learner performs the first two steps and the RBT completes the rest. Which procedure is this? A. Backward chaining. B. Shaping. C. Total task presentation. D. Forward chaining.
The answer is D. Forward chaining. The reliable discriminator among chaining variations is which step the learner performs independently.
Question 57. A learner says ba when he wants a ball. the plan has the RBT reinforce ba, then reinforce only ba, then only ball. Which procedure is this, and why is it not chaining? A. Shaping, because one behavior is refined through differential reinforcement of successive approximations rather than linking separate behaviors. B. Prompt fading, because the RBT is gradually changing an antecedent stimulus. C. Discrimination training, because reinforcement is eventually withheld for ba. D. Chaining, because each sound is a separate step joined into a sequence.
The answer is A. Shaping, because one behavior is refined through differential reinforcement of successive approximations rather than linking separate behaviors. Shaping refines a single response by reinforcing closer approximations while placing earlier approximations on extinction, so the topography of one behavior changes over time.
Question 58. During shaping, when should the RBT move to reinforcing only a closer approximation? A. As soon as the learner emits the closer approximation one time. B. Only after the terminal behavior has already occurred independently. C. When the current approximation is occurring consistently, so raising the criterion does not cause responding to break down. D. After a set number of trials, regardless of how the learner is performing.
The answer is C. When the current approximation is occurring consistently, so raising the criterion does not cause responding to break down. Shaping advances on the learner's data, not on a fixed timetable. The criterion is raised once the current approximation is stable, so there is a strong response to differentially reinforce.
Question 59. Data across several sessions show no progress on an acquisition target, and the RBT believes a more intrusive prompt would help. What should the RBT do? A. Ask the caregiver whether the prompt level should be increased. B. Continue implementing the plan as written, keep collecting data, and report the lack of progress to the supervisor. C. Switch to a full physical prompt and note the change in the session notes. D. Move the target to maintenance and choose a different target to teach.
The answer is B. Continue implementing the plan as written, keep collecting data, and report the lack of progress to the supervisor. The technician's role is to implement the skill acquisition plan with procedural fidelity and to document what happens. Designing and modifying the plan, including prompt level, targets, and mastery criteria, is the supervisor's responsibility.
Question 60. In a field of 2 cards, a learner selects the card on the left on nearly every trial, whether the instruction is touch dog or touch cup. What is the most likely problem and the appropriate response? A. The reinforcer is too weak. The RBT should substitute a reinforcer of their own choosing. B. Responding is under the control of position rather than the instruction. Counterbalance where the target is placed across trials. C. The learner has generalized the response. Move immediately to a much larger array. D. The learner has mastered the discrimination. Begin maintenance probes.
The answer is B. Responding is under the control of position rather than the instruction. Counterbalance where the target is placed across trials. Discrimination training works only if reinforcement follows responding to the discriminative stimulus and not to irrelevant features.
Question 61. A plan targets a new safety-related skill for a learner who becomes upset and stops working after making errors. Which prompting strategy best fits? A. Most to least prompting arranged so the correct response occurs from the first trial, with prompts then faded systematically. B. Reinforcing errors, so the learner keeps responding and stays engaged. C. No prompting at all, so the instruction alone gains control faster. D. Least to most prompting, so the learner has many chances to make errors and self-correct.
The answer is A. Most to least prompting arranged so the correct response occurs from the first trial, with prompts then faded systematically. Errorless teaching arrangements start with enough assistance to guarantee the correct response, and then fade it, which is indicated for brand new skills, safety-critical skills, and learners, whose errors reliably produce frustration or escape.
Question 62. A learner reliably imitates the RBT's model, but sits with his hands still and waits for the model even on targets he has performed independently before. Following the plan's fading procedures, what should the RBT do? A. Keep delivering the model at the same moment as the instruction so that errors stay low. B. Repeat the instruction until the learner responds. C. Deliver the model twice in each trial to make it clearer. D. Insert a delay between the instruction and the model and reinforce independent responses more richly than prompted ones.
The answer is D. Insert a delay between the instruction and the model and reinforce independent responses more richly than prompted ones. Waiting for a prompt that is no longer needed is prompt dependence, which develops when prompts are not faded.
Question 63. To help a learner select a target letter, the RBT prints it much larger and bolder than the comparison cards, then over sessions makes it look just like the others. How is that added help best described? A. An extra stimulus prompt, because a separate cue was placed beside the card. B. A response prompt, because the learner's movement was physically guided. C. A conditioned reinforcer, because the card was paired with praise. D. A within-stimulus prompt, faded by gradually changing a physical dimension of the stimulus.
The answer is D. A within-stimulus prompt, faded by gradually changing a physical dimension of the stimulus. Stimulus prompts act on the teaching materials rather than on the learner's behavior.
Question 64. A learner names community signs accurately with one RBT at one table, but not with other staff, with different picture sets, or at home. What is the most appropriate programming step? A. Return to continuous reinforcement in the original setting only. B. Move the target to maintenance, since it already meets criterion with one instructor. C. Keep training only in the original setting until responding is error-free, and expect the skill to transfer on its own. D. Program multiple exemplars. Teach across several instructors, settings, and sets of materials.
The answer is D. Program multiple exemplars. Teach across several instructors, settings, and sets of materials. Generalization has to be programmed rather than hoped for, and teaching under one narrow set of conditions is the classic reason a skill does not appear elsewhere.
Question 65. A skill that met mastery criterion months ago is no longer performed, even with the same RBT, in the same room, with the same materials. This is best described as a failure of which outcome? A. Maintenance, which concerns responding that persists over time, while generalization concerns responding across new settings, people, and materials. B. Generalization, which concerns responding over time, while maintenance concerns responding across new settings. C. Acquisition, because the skill was never actually learned in the first place. D. Discrimination, because the learner can no longer tell the materials apart.
The answer is A. Maintenance, which concerns responding that persists over time, while generalization concerns responding across new settings, people, and materials. Maintenance is responding that continues after teaching has ended, so it is measured across time. Generalization is responding that spreads to new settings, people, and materials.
Question 66. A token economy that had been working well is now failing. The learner earns tokens but stops working before the exchange, and at exchange time chooses the same small toy and drops it right away. Which is the most likely problem and the indicated fix? A. Tokens should be taken away for off-task behavior, because response cost always strengthens a token system. B. The learner simply needs more tokens for each correct response. C. The backup reinforcers have lost their value. Reassess preferences and rotate the backup menu as the plan directs. D. The tokens have lost their own intrinsic value. Switch to shinier, more attractive tokens.
The answer is C. The backup reinforcers have lost their value. Reassess preferences and rotate the backup menu as the plan directs. Tokens are generalized conditioned reinforcers with no value of their own. They work only because they are exchanged for backup reinforcers. So a stale or satiated backup menu collapses the whole system.
Question 67. During a math worksheet, a student rips the paper and pushes it off the desk. Each time this happens, the adult takes the worksheet away and the student sits quietly until the next activity begins. Which function is most likely maintaining the paper ripping? A. Escape from the task demand. B. Automatic sensory reinforcement. C. Access to adult attention. D. Access to a preferred tangible item.
The answer is A. Escape from the task demand. Function is determined by the consequence that immediately follows the behavior, not by what the behavior looks like.
Question 68. A client hums and rocks at a steady rate whether he is alone in his room or in a busy group, and the rate does not change when staff talk to him or when they say nothing. No item or activity is delivered afterward. Which function does this pattern most suggest? A. Access to tangible items. B. Automatic sensory reinforcement. C. Escape from demands. D. Social attention.
The answer is B. Automatic sensory reinforcement. Behavior that occurs at similar rates when the person is alone and when others are present, with no social consequence following it, is most consistent with automatic reinforcement. The behavior itself produces the reinforcing stimulation and does not depend on another person delivering anything.
Question 69. A child is playing with blocks. When the RBT puts the blocks away, the child screams. The screaming stops as soon as the blocks are handed back. Which function is most likely maintaining the screaming? A. Escape from a demand. B. Access to a tangible item. C. Social attention from the RBT. D. Automatic sensory reinforcement.
The answer is B. Access to a tangible item. The screaming begins when a preferred item is removed and ends when that specific item is returned. So the maintaining consequence is access to the tangible.
Question 70. A behavior plan directs the RBT to give the learner brief social attention every 2 minutes on a timer, whether or not disruptive behavior has occurred. Which procedure is being described? A. Response cost. B. Differential reinforcement of other behavior. C. Extinction of attention-maintained behavior. D. Non-contingent reinforcement delivered on a time-based schedule.
The answer is D. Non-contingent reinforcement delivered on a time-based schedule. Non-contingent reinforcement delivers the maintaining reinforcer on a time-based schedule that is independent of behavior, which weakens the motivation to engage in the problem behavior because attention is already freely available.
Question 71. A plan calls for time-based delivery of attention on a fixed schedule and contains no instruction to delay delivery. The timer sounds at the exact moment the learner starts to yell. What should the RBT do? A. Deliver the attention on the timed schedule as written, because in this procedure delivery depends on the clock and not on the learner's behavior. B. Deliver the attention and explain to the learner that it is not because he yelled. C. Skip that delivery entirely so the learner learns that yelling costs attention. D. Withhold the attention until the learner has been quiet for a while, since giving it now would reinforce yelling.
The answer is A. Deliver the attention on the timed schedule as written, because in this procedure delivery depends on the clock and not on the learner's behavior. Time-based non-contingent delivery is defined by being independent of behavior. Making the delivery depend on whether the problem behavior just occurred converts it into a contingent consequence and changes the written procedure.
Question 72. Before presenting a difficult writing task, the RBT quickly asks the learner to clap, give a high five, and touch his nose, all easy responses he performs readily, praising each one, and then immediately presents the writing request. Which antecedent intervention is the RBT using? A. Demand fading. B. High probability request sequence. C. Non-contingent reinforcement. D. Differential reinforcement of low rates of behavior.
The answer is B. High probability request sequence. A high probability request sequence presents several easy, already mastered requests that the learner reliably follows, reinforcing each, and then delivers the difficult low probability request while the momentum of compliance is still high.
Question 73. Why are antecedent interventions generally preferred over waiting to respond after the problem behavior has already occurred? A. They punish the problem behavior more quickly than consequence procedures do. B. They remove the need for the supervisor to write a behavior plan. C. They change the conditions before the behavior occurs, reducing the motivation for it, so the learner is less likely to engage in the behavior or contact its reinforcer at all. D. They are the only procedures an RBT is permitted to use without a written plan.
The answer is C. They change the conditions before the behavior occurs, reducing the motivation for it, so the learner is less likely to engage in the behavior or contact its reinforcer at all. Antecedent interventions act on motivating operations and evocative stimuli before responding occurs, so the problem behavior is less likely to be emitted and less likely to be reinforced. Nobody has to be exposed to the behavior or its risks.
Question 74. Whenever a student raises his hand, the RBT calls on him and answers his question. When he shouts out the same question, the RBT does not respond. Which differential reinforcement procedure is the RBT implementing? A. Differential reinforcement of alternative behavior. B. Differential reinforcement of low rates of behavior. C. Differential reinforcement of other behavior. D. Differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior.
The answer is A. Differential reinforcement of alternative behavior. A specific appropriate alternative response, hand raising, is reinforced with the same consequence that maintains shouting out teacher attention, while shouting out is placed on extinction.
Question 75. A learner frequently slaps her own leg with her hand. Her plan directs the RBT to praise her and deliver a token when her hands are folded in her lap, and to withhold reinforcement when slapping occurs. Which differential reinforcement procedure is this? A. Differential reinforcement of low rates of behavior. B. Differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. C. Differential reinforcement of other behavior. D. Non-contingent reinforcement.
The answer is B. Differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. The reinforced response hands folded in the lap physically cannot occur at the same time as the problem behavior slapping the leg with the hand, which is what makes it incompatible rather than merely alternative.
Question 76. A plan directs the RBT to start a timer. If the learner has not spat at all when the timer ends, she earns a token, and if spitting occurs, the timer is restarted. Which procedure is described? A. Escape extinction. B. Differential reinforcement of low rates of behavior. C. Differential reinforcement of other behavior with a reset provision. D. Differential reinforcement of alternative behavior.
The answer is C. Differential reinforcement of other behavior with a reset provision. Reinforcement is delivered for the complete absence of the target behavior throughout an interval, and the reset provision restarts the interval whenever the behavior occurs. This is differential reinforcement of other behavior.
Question 77. A student asks appropriate questions, but so often that the group cannot move forward. The team decides the questions are acceptable at a lower rate, and the plan states that he earns a preferred activity at the end of the session if he asked no more than 5 questions. Which procedure is described? A. Response cost. B. Differential reinforcement of other behavior. C. Differential reinforcement of low rates of behavior. D. Extinction of question asking.
The answer is C. Differential reinforcement of low rates of behavior. Differential reinforcement of low rates is used when the behavior itself is appropriate and should be reduced in frequency rather than eliminated. Reinforcement is delivered at the end of the session because the total number of responses stayed at or below the stated criterion.
Question 78. A learner screams to get out of chores. The team teaches him to hand a staff member a card that means break, please, which immediately produces a short break, while screaming no longer produces a break. Which procedure best describes this? A. Response cost, in which a break is taken away after screaming. B. Non-contingent escape, in which breaks are delivered on a timer. C. Functional communication training, in which a communication response produces the same reinforcer the problem behavior produced. D. Differential reinforcement of other behavior, in which the absence of screaming is reinforced.
The answer is C. Functional communication training, in which a communication response produces the same reinforcer the problem behavior produced. Functional communication training is a form of differential reinforcement of alternative behavior, in which the learner is taught a communication response that is functionally equivalent to the problem behavior. It produces the same reinforcer, here escape from the task.
Question 79. A learner's plan places screaming that is maintained by escape from tasks on extinction. During a task, the learner begins screaming. What should the RBT do? A. Keep the task in place and continue prompting the learner through it as the plan specifies, so screaming no longer produces escape. B. Give a short break now and present the task again later when the learner is calm. C. Turn away, say nothing, and allow the learner to leave the work area. D. Remove the task materials and wait quietly until the learner stops screaming.
The answer is A. Keep the task in place and continue prompting the learner through it as the plan specifies, so screaming no longer produces escape. Extinction means withholding the specific reinforcer that has maintained the behavior, so it must match the function.
Question 80. An RBT is implementing planned ignoring for yelling that is maintained by attention, but occasionally responds when the yelling becomes very loud. What is the most likely effect on the yelling? A. The yelling will change function from attention to escape. B. Loud yelling will become more persistent and harder to reduce because it is now being reinforced intermittently. C. The yelling will decrease faster because the learner receives occasional feedback. D. There will be no meaningful effect as long as most instances are ignored.
The answer is B. Loud yelling will become more persistent and harder to reduce because it is now being reinforced intermittently, occasionally giving in places the behavior on an intermittent schedule of reinforcement, which makes responding more resistant to extinction. And because the RBT responds only to the loudest instances, it also shapes more intense behavior.
Question 81. On the first 2 days after an extinction procedure begins, a learner's tantrums are longer and louder than they were during baseline, and then they start to decline. What does this pattern describe? A. Behavioral contrast. B. An extinction burst. C. Spontaneous recovery. D. Resurgence.
The answer is B, an extinction burst. An extinction burst is a temporary increase in the frequency, duration, or intensity of the behavior immediately after the maintaining reinforcer is first withheld, before responding decreases.
Question 82. A learner's screaming was reduced to 0 and stayed at 0 for several weeks. After a week away from the program, she screams several times on her first day back, and screaming falls away again as the team continues the procedure unchanged. What does this most likely illustrate? A. Spontaneous recovery. B. An extinction burst. C. Loss of the reinforcer's effectiveness through satiation. D. Resurgence of an earlier response.
The answer is A, spontaneous recovery. Spontaneous recovery is the brief reappearance of a previously extinguished behavior after a period during which it had not occurred, typically following a break. If the procedure continues to be implemented consistently, responding subsides again.
Question 83. A learner had been taught to hand over a picture card to request a break, and head hitting had stopped. A staff member who does not know the plan ignores the card and keeps the task going, and within the session, head hitting returns. Which phenomenon does this best illustrate? A. Resurgence, in which a previously reinforced response returns when a more recently reinforced response stops producing reinforcement. B. Spontaneous recovery after a long period without the behavior. C. Behavioral contrast produced by a change in setting. D. Stimulus generalization to a new staff member.
The answer is A, resurgence, in which a previously reinforced response returns when a more recently reinforced response stops producing reinforcement. Resurgence occurs when a recently taught response, here the card exchange, stops producing its reinforcer, and an earlier response from the same functional class returns.
Question 84. 2 days into an extinction procedure written into the behavior plan, the target behavior increases sharply. Everyone in the room is safe. What is the best action for the RBT to take? A. Discontinue the procedure, since the increase shows it is making the behavior worse. B. Continue implementing the procedure as written, keep collecting data, and report the increase to the supervisor. C. Deliver the reinforcer once to settle the learner, and resume the procedure the next day. D. Add a consequence the RBT believes will reduce the behavior more quickly.
The answer is B. Continue implementing the procedure as written, keep collecting data, and report the increase to the supervisor. A temporary increase early in extinction is an expected side effect, and delivering the reinforcer during the spike would intermittently reinforce the most intense responding and make it far harder to reduce.
Question 85. A learner's hitting is maintained by escape from group work. A classroom aide suggests that each time he hits, he should be sent to sit alone in the hallway. Why is this suggestion most likely to be a problem? A. Removing him from the group lets him avoid the work, so the consequence would reinforce hitting rather than reduce it. B. Hitting would decrease so quickly that data could not be collected. C. Timeout procedures are never appropriate for any learner in any circumstance. D. Timeout is effective only for behavior maintained by automatic reinforcement.
The answer is A. Removing him from the group lets him avoid the work, so the consequence would reinforce hitting rather than reduce it. Timeout is time out from positive reinforcement and only decreases behavior when the setting the learner leaves is genuinely reinforcing.
Question 86. A learner begins throwing chairs in a classroom where other students are present. What should the RBT do first? A. Begin recording an antecedent-behavior-consequence description to determine the function. B. Continue presenting the task so that the learner does not escape the demand. C. Telephone the caregiver to ask how the family prefers this behavior to be handled. D. Follow the organization's crisis protocol to make the area safe, moving the other students away and clearing hazards.
The answer is D. Follow the organization's crisis protocol to make the area safe, moving the other students away and clearing hazards. In a crisis, the immediate priority is safety, and the RBT implements the organization's pre-established emergency protocol exactly as trained rather than improvising.
Question 87. An RBT has been implementing a behavior reduction procedure exactly as written, but over several weeks the target behavior has steadily increased, and the learner has begun to show aggression during sessions. What should the RBT do? A. Modify the procedure based on what seems to be working better in session. B. Keep implementing the plan as written while maintaining safety, and report the data and concerns to the supervisor promptly so the supervisor can decide whether to revise the plan. C. Stop the procedure entirely until the behavior settles down on its own. D. Ask the caregiver which parts of the plan they would like changed.
The answer is B. Keep implementing the plan as written while maintaining safety, and report the data and concerns to the supervisor promptly so the supervisor can decide whether to revise the plan. An RBT implements the plan designed by the supervisor and does not add, alter, or discontinue procedures on their own authority. Changing a procedure mid-course also makes the data uninterpretable.
Question 88. An RBT is given a new written behavior reduction plan to implement. Which of the following would you expect the plan to contain so that the RBT can carry it out as designed? A. A record of the RBT's supervision meetings and training history. B. A list of additional consequences the RBT may invent if the written ones do not appear to be working. C. The learner's medical diagnosis and expected long-term prognosis. D. An observable definition of the target behavior, the antecedent strategies, the replacement behavior to reinforce, the consequence procedures, and how data are to be collected.
The answer is D. An observable definition of the target behavior, the antecedent strategies, the replacement behavior to reinforce, the consequence procedures, and how data are to be collected. A behavior reduction plan has to tell the implementer exactly what behavior is targeted in observable terms, what to do before the behavior, what appropriate behavior to reinforce instead, what to do when the behavior occurs, and how to measure it. Otherwise, the procedure cannot be applied consistently across people and sessions.
Question 89. An RBT is writing the note for a session that has just ended. Which entry is written most objectively? A. The client was frustrated by the hard tasks and gave up on the program. B. The client refused to work because he wanted to avoid the demands. C. The client had a rough day and was not motivated to work. D. The client pushed materials off the table twice during the matching program and did not respond to the next two instructions.
The answer is D. The client pushed materials off the table twice during the matching program and did not respond to the next two instructions. An objective note records what an independent observer could have seen, heard, and counted.
Question 90. Which session note statement is a description of behavior rather than a conclusion about it? A. The client was seeking attention from the technician. B. The client's hand biting is maintained by escape. C. The client bit the back of his left hand several times immediately after each instruction was delivered. D. The client bit his hand in order to get out of the demand.
The answer is C. The client bit the back of his left hand several times immediately after each instruction was delivered. A description reports the observed topography, count, and timing of what happened. A conclusion names a purpose or a behavioral function.
Question 91. An RBT writes, Client completed 7 of 10 receptive identification trials independently and was clearly being defiant for the rest of the session. What is the problem with this note? A. The note should not include trial counts, only a summary of the whole session. B. The note should have named the presumed function of the client's behavior. C. The second half of the sentence states an interpretation of the client's attitude instead of an observable behavior. D. There is no problem because the note includes a specific number of trials.
The answer is C. The second half of the sentence states an interpretation of the client's attitude instead of an observable behavior. Accurate counts in one clause do not make the rest of the sentence objective.
Question 92. Which sentence about caregiver involvement belongs in an objective session note? A. The family does not seem to care about the program. B. The caregiver reported that the token board was not used between the last 2 sessions. C. Mom never follows through with the plan at home. D. The caregiver was uncooperative again this week.
The answer is B. The caregiver reported that the token board was not used between the last 2 sessions. A note records either what the RBT directly observed or what someone reported, clearly attributed as a report.
Question 93. An RBT is scheduled for a session from 3:00 to 6:00 p.m., but the client becomes ill and the session ends at 5:00 p.m. What should the session note and the service record show? A. No time at all, because a shortened session cannot be documented. B. 3:00 to 6:00 p.m., because that time was reserved for the client. C. 3:00 to 5:00 p.m., together with an objective statement of why the session ended early. D. 3:00 to 6:00 p.m., with a comment that the supervisor approved the schedule.
The answer is C. 3:00 to 5:00 p.m., together with an objective statement of why the session ended early. Documentation is the verification that a service was delivered, so the recorded time must match the time actually worked. Recording hours that were not provided is falsification regardless of what was scheduled.
Question 94. A busy RBT saves time by copying the previous day's session note and changing only the date. Why is this unacceptable? A. The note must describe what actually happened in that specific session, and a duplicated note is an inaccurate record of the services delivered. B. Session notes may only be written by the supervising behavior analyst. C. Notes must be handwritten rather than typed. D. Notes may not list the same program names on consecutive days.
The answer is A. The note must describe what actually happened in that specific session, and a duplicated note is an inaccurate record of the services delivered. Each note is a factual record of one specific session and supports the claim that those services were provided.
Question 95. When should an RBT record data during a session? A. Only when the supervisor is present to observe the session. B. At the end of the workday, when all of the day's sessions can be summarized together. C. At the end of the week, so that trends can be seen before anything is written down. D. As the behavior occurs, or immediately afterward, using the data sheet and definitions specified in the plan.
The answer is D. As the behavior occurs, or immediately afterward, using the data sheet and definitions specified in the plan. Data written from memory hours or days later are estimates, and memory systematically distorts frequency and sequence.
Question 96. An RBT notices that a tally was written in the wrong column on a paper data sheet earlier in the session. What is the appropriate way to fix it? A. Correct it transparently as the organization's policy directs. For example, a single line through the entry, the correct value, and the RBT's initials and date, so the original entry remains readable. B. Leave the error and mention it verbally at the next supervision meeting. C. Erase the entry completely and write the correct value in its place. D. Cover the entry with correction fluid so the sheet stays neat.
The answer is A. Correct it transparently as the organization's policy directs, for example, a single line through the entry, the correct value, and the RBT's initials and date, so the original entry remains readable. Clinical records must remain auditable, which means a reader should be able to see both what was originally written and what it was changed to, by whom and when.
Question 97. After submitting a session note, an RBT realizes it reported data from the wrong client's program. What should the RBT do? A. Ask a coworker to change the entry so the RBT is not blamed. B. Wait for the supervisor to catch the error at the next data review. C. Quietly write a new note for the correct client and delete the incorrect one without telling anyone. D. Notify the supervisor immediately and correct the record through the organization's documented correction process.
The answer is D. Notify the supervisor immediately and correct the record through the organization's documented correction process. Once inaccurate information has been submitted, it may already be guiding decisions, so it must be corrected promptly, and the people relying on it must be told.
Question 98. A fire drill interrupted a session, and the RBT was unable to record data for part of it. What should the documentation show? A. Only the data that were actually collected, with a note explaining the interruption and the period during which no data were recorded. B. The average of the previous 3 sessions, entered for the missing period. C. Nothing about the interruption, because the drill was outside the RBT's control. D. An estimate of what the data probably would have been, based on the client's typical performance.
The answer is A. Only the data that were actually collected, with a note explaining the interruption and the period during which no data were recorded. Filling a gap with an estimate or an average puts numbers in the record that were never observed, which is fabrication and makes the whole data set untrustworthy.
Question 99. Which of the following should an RBT report to the supervisor immediately rather than waiting for the next scheduled supervision meeting? A. The RBT would like to request a change to next semester's schedule. B. The client will begin occupational therapy at another clinic next month. C. A preferred item the client usually chooses was unavailable for one trial. D. The client had a seizure during the session and the caregiver was notified.
The answer is D. The client had a seizure during the session and the caregiver was notified. Timeliness is triaged by risk. Anything involving the client's health, safety, rights, or a serious incident goes to the supervisor right away, because the supervisor may need to act before the next session.
Question 100. At drop-off, a caregiver mentions that the client's physician increased the dose of a medication over the weekend. What should the RBT do? A. Tell the caregiver which behaviors the higher dose is likely to produce. B. Suggest that the caregiver hold the medication until the team can observe its effects. C. Document the caregiver's report objectively and notify the supervisor promptly, because a health or medication change can affect behavior and the data. D. Mention it only if problem behavior increases during the session.
The answer is C. Document the caregiver's report objectively and notify the supervisor promptly, because a health or medication change can affect behavior and the data. A medication or health change is a variable that can alter the value of reinforcers and the likelihood of behavior, so the supervisor needs it in order to read the data correctly rather than mistaking a real change for a program effect.
Question 101. Over several weeks, an RBT notices that the client's independent responding on one program has stayed flat, with no upward trend. What should the RBT do? A. Stop running the program until the next supervision meeting. B. Continue implementing the program as written and report the pattern to the supervisor so it can be evaluated. C. Record slightly higher scores so that the program is not discontinued. D. Add an extra prompt level to make the program easier for the client.
The answer is B. Continue implementing the program as written and report the pattern to the supervisor so it can be evaluated. A program that is not producing progress is exactly the kind of information the supervisor must have, but the decision to change it belongs to the supervisor, who needs accurate data to make it.
Question 102. A caregiver asks the RBT, "Do you think this plan is actually working, and can we add a goal for toilet training?" What is the best response? A. Acknowledge the question without offering a clinical opinion, document the request, and pass it to the supervising behavior analyst. B. Share the RBT's own opinion about the client's progress, based on the session data. C. Tell the caregiver that questions about the program are not part of the RBT's job. D. Start collecting baseline toileting data so the new goal can begin right away.
The answer is A. Acknowledge the question without offering a clinical opinion, document the request, and pass it to the supervising behavior analyst. Judging whether a plan is working and deciding what goals to add are clinical decisions that rest with the supervising behavior analyst, so the RBT acts as a conduit. Listen, record, refer.
Question 103. During a session, an RBT observes unexplained injuries on the client, and the client makes a statement that raises a suspicion of abuse. What should the RBT do? A. Question the client and the caregiver first to determine whether abuse actually occurred before reporting anything. B. Follow the mandated reporting requirements that apply in that jurisdiction and workplace, and notify the supervisor, without waiting for the supervisor's permission to make a legally required report. C. Write it in the session note and take no further action, since reporting is the supervisor's responsibility. D. Report only if the supervisor agrees after reading the session note.
The answer is B. Follow the mandated reporting requirements that apply in that jurisdiction and workplace, and notify the supervisor, without waiting for the supervisor's permission to make a legally required report. The duty to report a reasonable suspicion is a legal obligation that sits on the individual who holds it, so it is not conditional on a supervisor's approval, and the reporter is not the investigator. Suspicion, not proof, is the threshold.
Question 104. A coworker asks an RBT to run a procedure the RBT has never been trained on. Whom should the RBT contact first? A. The board that issued the RBT's credential. B. The client's caregiver, to ask whether they are comfortable with it. C. The organization's human resources department. D. The RBT's own supervisor, to report that the request is outside the RBT's trained competence and to ask for direction.
The answer is D. The RBT's own supervisor, to report that the request is outside the RBT's trained competence and to ask for direction. An RBT provides services only within a defined role and only after the supervisor has confirmed competence, so an untrained procedure is never implemented on a coworker's say-so. The request goes to the supervisor, and the communication is documented.
Question 105. Which statement belongs in an incident report written after an episode of aggression? A. A factual sequence of what happened before, during, and after the behavior, who was present, the actions staff took, and the notifications that were made. B. A recommendation that the behavior plan be changed to add a restrictive procedure. C. An explanation of why the client became upset, and what he was trying to achieve. D. A statement that the substitute technician's inexperience caused the episode.
The answer is A. A factual sequence of what happened before, during, and after the behavior, who was present, the action staff took, and the notifications that were made. An incident report is held to the same objectivity standard as a session note. It records the observable sequence and the response, because that record may later be reviewed by the supervisor, the organization, or outside parties.
Question 106. A client leaves the therapy room without permission and is found in the parking lot. No one is injured. What should the RBT do? A. Mention it to the caregiver at pickup and consider the matter closed. B. Note it in the session note and raise it at the next supervision meeting, since no one was hurt. C. Notify the supervisor immediately and complete an incident report, as the organization's policy requires, describing the event objectively. D. Wait to see whether it happens again before reporting it.
The answer is C. Notify the supervisor immediately and complete an incident report as the organization's policy requires, describing the event objectively. Whether an event requires immediate notification depends on the risk it created, not on whether harm happened to occur this time. Leaving the setting unsupervised is a safety event with an obvious potential for serious harm.
Question 107. A caregiver posts a photo of their child with the RBT and tells the RBT it is fine to share it in a private online group for behavior technicians. What should the RBT do? A. Share it after cropping out the child's face, since the client then cannot be identified. B. Share it because the caregiver gave permission. C. Share it only in a group whose members are all credentialed professionals. D. Decline to share it because identifying client information should not be posted on social media even with caregiver permission, with no name attached or to a private audience.
The answer is D. Decline to share it because identifying client information should not be posted on social media even with caregiver permission, with no name attached or to a private audience. The standard for client information on social media is categorical rather than case by case, because control of the material is lost the moment it is posted in context. Tags and metadata can re-identify a person the poster believed was anonymous.
Question 108. An RBT finishes an in-home session and must return the paper data sheets to the clinic the next morning. What is the appropriate handling? A. Transport them in a closed, secured container and store them in the employer's designated secure location, following the organization's records policy. B. Photograph the sheets with a personal phone and shred the originals. C. Leave them with the caregiver until the next visit. D. Leave the sheets in the trunk of the car overnight so they are not forgotten.
The answer is A. Transport them in a closed, secured container and store them in the employer's designated secure location, following the organization's records policy. Confidential records must stay under the control of the person responsible for them, and inside the employer's approved storage system at every point, including while in transit.
Question 109. While waiting in the clinic lobby, the parent of one client asks the RBT how a different child in the program is doing. What is the best response? A. Answer briefly, since the two families already know each other. B. Share only positive information, because that cannot cause harm. C. Explain that the RBT is not able to discuss any client, and redirect the conversation. D. Give a general answer without using the other child's name.
The answer is C. Explain that the RBT is not able to discuss any client and redirect the conversation. Confidentiality is not satisfied by leaving out a name, limiting the content to good news, or relying on who already knows whom, because in a shared lobby, the listener can usually identify the child anyway.
Question 110. Late at night, a caregiver texts the RBT's personal cell phone asking for that day's session data and for the RBT's opinion on whether the child should change schools. What should the RBT do? A. Keep the exchange in the employer's approved channels rather than personal text. Share only what the RBT's role and workplace policy permit, and route the question about schooling to the supervising behavior analyst. B. Forward the caregiver's question to a coworker who knows the family better. C. Block the number and say nothing further to keep boundaries clear. D. Send the data by text and give an honest opinion, since the caregiver is the client's parent.
The answer is A. Keep the exchange in the employer's approved channels rather than personal text. Share only what the RBT's role and workplace policy permit, and route the question about schooling to the supervising behavior analyst. Protected client information belongs on employer-approved, secured channels, so sending it from a personal phone puts it outside any system the organization can safeguard or retain.
Question 111. While out to dinner, an RBT's friend points to a child across the restaurant and asks, "Isn't he one of the kids you work with?" What is the best response? A. Confirm that the child is a client, but explain that no details about the services can be shared. B. Answer honestly, because the friend already knows the family socially. C. Explain that confidentiality prevents the RBT from confirming or denying whether anyone is a client. D. Say yes, and ask the friend to keep the information private.
The answer is C. Explain that confidentiality prevents the RBT from confirming or denying whether anyone is a client. Whether a particular person receives services is itself confidential information, so merely confirming the professional relationship is already a disclosure, even if no other details follow.
Question 112. A caregiver asks an RBT to start teaching her son to tie his shoes today, noting that the skill is not in his current program. What should the RBT do? A. Teach it informally at the end of the session, without collecting data on it. B. Tell the caregiver that shoe tying is not an appropriate goal for her son right now. C. Thank the caregiver, explain that goals are added by the supervisor, and pass the request on to the supervisor. D. Begin teaching the skill, since it is functional and unlikely to cause harm.
The answer is C. Thank the caregiver, explain that goals are added by the supervisor, and pass the request on to the supervisor. Selecting or adding a program goal is a clinical decision that belongs to the supervisor, and telling the family a goal is or is not appropriate is that same decision stated as an opinion.
Question 113. A classroom teacher asks an RBT to explain what a student's assessment results mean and whether his diagnosis is likely to change. What is the best action? A. Decline to interpret the results. Explain that this is the supervisor's role and relay the teacher's questions to the supervisor. B. Give the teacher a copy of the report, since the school is part of the child's team. C. Tell the teacher the scores show the student is doing better than he was last year. D. Summarize the report in plain language so the teacher can make use of it.
The answer is A. Decline to interpret the results, explain that this is the supervisor's role, and relay the teacher's questions to the supervisor. Interpreting assessment results and discussing a diagnosis are clinical activities outside the RBT's role, and summarizing or characterizing the scores is still interpretation.
Question 114. A client's mother sends an RBT a friend request on her personal social media account and messages her there about rescheduling a session. What is the best response? A. Accept the request, but never post anything related to work. B. Accept the request because it makes scheduling communication easier. C. Leave the request unanswered. Keep scheduling in the employer's approved channels and tell the supervisor it happened. D. Accept the request and ask the mother not to mention sessions online.
The answer is C. Leave the request unanswered. Keep scheduling in the employer's approved channels and tell the supervisor it happened. Connecting on a personal account mixes a personal role with a professional one, which is a multiple relationship that can erode boundaries and expose client information through posts, photos, and message histories.
Question 115. A client masters a difficult skill and the RBT records a short video of it. She is considering posting the video on her private social media account with the child's face blurred and no name attached. What should she do? A. Do not post video, photographs, or written information about clients on social media at all. B. Post it only in a closed online group made up of other behavior technicians. C. Post it, since nothing identifying remains in the video. D. Post it if the parents give permission first.
The answer is A. Do not post video, photographs, or written information about clients on social media at all. The standard bars sharing client photos, video, or written information on social media and websites, and it lists no exception for a private account, a closed group, a blurred face, or parental permission.
Question 116. At the end of the year, a client's family gives an RBT an expensive piece of jewelry to thank her for her work. What is the best action? A. Accept it graciously so the family is not offended. B. Accept it and give the family a gift of similar value in return. C. Decline politely, explain the professional limit on gifts, and inform the supervisor. D. Accept it on behalf of the clinic and leave it in the staff room.
The answer is C. Decline politely, explain the professional limit on gifts, and inform the supervisor. Gifts beyond an occasional token of gratitude are limited because they create conflicts of interest and multiple relationships. They place the family and the technician in a social exchange that can bias how services are delivered and how concerns are raised.
Question 117. An RBT's employer prohibits staff from exchanging gifts with client families at all. A family offers him a small item that would be acceptable as an occasional token of thanks under professional standards. What should he do? A. Follow the employer's stricter rule and decline, explaining the workplace policy. B. Accept it away from the clinic so the employer is not involved. C. Accept it, since professional standards permit small tokens of gratitude. D. Accept it and record it in the session note.
The answer is A. Follow the employer's stricter rule and decline, explaining the workplace policy. An RBT must satisfy professional standards and workplace requirements at the same time. So when the employer's rule is the stricter of the two, the employer's rule governs and the gift is declined.
Question 118. A client's parents offer to pay an RBT to babysit their son on weekends. What is the best action? A. Tell the parents to ask the supervisor whether babysitting would be allowed. B. Agree, because babysitting happens outside work hours and is unrelated to services. C. Agree, as long as the RBT does not run any programs while babysitting. D. Decline, then tell the supervisor about the offer and document the conversation.
The answer is D. Decline, then tell the supervisor about the offer and document the conversation. Taking a second, paid personal role with a client's family is a multiple relationship. It can bias the technician's judgment, make it harder for either side to raise problems, and blur which behavior the family is paying for.
Question 119. An RBT sees a coworker writing and signing session notes for a session that never took place. What should the RBT do first? A. Ask the coworker to correct the notes and consider the matter closed. B. Report what was observed to the supervisor and document the observation, the date, and the action taken. C. Do nothing, because that client is not on the RBT's caseload. D. File a report with the certification board describing the coworker's conduct.
The answer is B. Report what was observed to the supervisor and document the observation, the date, and the action taken. Falsified service records are an ethical and legal problem, and the established pathway is to raise the concern through the chain of command first, while documenting the actions taken, dates, and outcome.
Question 120. A client arrives with unexplained injuries and says an adult at home caused them. The RBT tells the supervisor, who says to wait and watch for a few more sessions. What is the best action? A. Wait as instructed, since the supervisor is responsible for the work the RBT performs. B. Write the observation in the session note and take no further action. C. Carry out the reporting duty that applies to the RBT, keep the supervisor informed, and document what was observed and done. D. Ask the parent about the injuries at pickup before taking any other step.
The answer is C. Carry out the reporting duty that applies to the RBT, keep the supervisor informed, and document what was observed and done. The duty to report suspected abuse is a legal obligation held by the individual who forms the suspicion, so a supervisor's instruction to wait cannot cancel it. Deferring also leaves the client exposed to further harm.
Question 121. During an observation, a supervisor tells an RBT that she is delivering prompts too late. The RBT believes the delay was caused by how the client was behaving that day. What is the best response? A. Explain why the supervisor's observation does not reflect what usually happens in sessions. B. Accept the feedback, ask clarifying questions, rehearse the corrected timing, and use it going forward. C. Ask to be assigned a different supervisor for future observations. D. Agree in the moment but keep working as before, since the client is still making progress.
The answer is B. Accept the feedback, ask clarifying questions, rehearse the corrected timing, and use it going forward. Professional conduct applies during supervision itself, and the required response to corrective feedback is to change performance rather than to justify it.
Question 122. After a refresher training, an RBT realizes she has been running one prompting step incorrectly for the past several sessions. What should she do? A. Simply begin running the step correctly from now on and say nothing. B. Remove the affected data so the record is not misleading. C. Tell the supervisor promptly, identify which sessions were affected, and follow the supervisor's direction about the data. D. Mention it at the next scheduled supervision meeting.
The answer is C. Tell the supervisor promptly, identify which sessions were affected, and follow the supervisor's direction about the data. The supervisor makes clinical decisions from the data, so data collected while a procedure was run incorrectly can lead to a wrong decision about whether a program is working.
Question 123. A new client's plan includes a feeding protocol the RBT has never been trained to run. The supervisor is unavailable, and the parent asks the RBT to start it today. What should the RBT do? A. Watch an instructional video during the session and then run the protocol. B. Run the protocol since it is written into the approved plan. C. Ask the parent to demonstrate the protocol and follow along with her. D. Do not run the protocol. Explain that it must wait until he has been trained and his competence confirmed, and contact the supervisor.
The answer is D. Do not run the protocol. Explain that it must wait until he has been trained and his competence confirmed, and contact the supervisor. An RBT provides a service only after the supervisor has confirmed that he can carry it out correctly. A written plan authorizes the procedure for the client, not an untrained technician to perform it.
Question 124. A restrictive procedure is written into a client's documented behavior plan, but the supervisor has not yet watched the RBT practice it or confirmed his competence with it. What should the RBT do? A. Implement it only when the problem behavior becomes severe. B. Wait to implement it until the supervisor has confirmed his competence with the procedure. C. Implement it because it is part of the documented plan. D. Ask an experienced coworker to watch him do it once and confirm he is ready.
The answer is B. Wait to implement it until the supervisor has confirmed his competence with the procedure. Restrictive and punishment-based procedures require two conditions at once. The procedure must be part of a documented behavior change plan, and the supervisor must have verified the technician's competence with it.
Question 125. While implementing a plan exactly as written, an RBT notices that one physical guidance step consistently causes the client visible pain. What is the best action? A. Stop that step to protect the client, notify the supervisor right away, and document what happened. B. Continue exactly as written, since only the supervisor may change a plan. C. Soften the step on his own and note the change in the session record. D. Ask the caregiver whether the step should keep being used.
The answer is A. Stop that step to protect the client, notify the supervisor right away, and document what happened. The obligation to avoid harm outranks procedural fidelity, so continuing a step that is hurting the client is not defensible simply because it is written down.
Question 126. Which of the following best describes effective ongoing supervision of an RBT? A. The supervisor watches the RBT working with the client, models the procedure, has the RBT practice it, and gives specific feedback. B. The supervisor sends a training video and confirms that the RBT watched it. C. The supervisor checks in and asks whether any problems have come up this month. D. The supervisor reviews the RBT's data sheets and sends written comments by email.
The answer is A. The supervisor watches the RBT working with the client, models the procedure, has the RBT practice it, and gives specific feedback. Effective supervision is built on behavioral skills training, instruction, modeling, rehearsal, and feedback, anchored in direct observation of the technician actually delivering services.
Question 127. A family tells an RBT that a mealtime routine used in the clinic conflicts with the way meals are handled at home. What is the best action? A. Read up on what families from that background usually do at mealtimes. B. Continue the clinic routine unchanged, since consistency across settings matters most. C. Change the routine during sessions so it matches what the family does at home. D. Ask the family about their routine and priorities and bring what they say to the supervisor so the plan can take it into account.
The answer is D. Ask the family about their routine and priorities and bring what they say to the supervisor so the plan can take it into account. Cultural responsiveness is something the technician does, not something she assumes. She asks the family about their practices and priorities and carries that information to the supervisor, who is the person who can adjust the plan.
Question 128. An RBT is beginning with a new client whose family background is unfamiliar to her, and she needs to identify reinforcers. What is the best action? A. Use the items that worked well with a similar client on her caseload. B. Conduct a preference assessment as directed and ask the caregivers about this client's particular likes. C. Ask the supervisor to select reinforcers based on the client's diagnosis. D. Use items that children from that background usually enjoy.
The answer is B. Conduct a preference assessment as directed and ask the caregivers about this client's particular likes. Reinforcers are individual. What functions as a reinforcer is established by direct assessment and by information from the people who know the client, never inferred from cultural background, from another client, or from a diagnosis.
Question 129. An RBT is going through a serious personal crisis, has been arriving distracted, and has missed steps in sessions for 2 weeks. What is the best action? A. Lower the demands placed on clients so the sessions are easier to get through. B. Tell the supervisor, follow the plan they agree on, which may include not working with clients until the situation is resolved, and document the steps taken. C. Take a personal day and say nothing, because the situation is private. D. Push through, since personal matters should not be allowed to affect work.
The answer is B. Tell the supervisor, follow the plan they agree on, which may include not working with clients until the situation is resolved, and document the steps taken. Personal circumstances become a professional matter as soon as they impair service delivery, because the client is the one who absorbs the missed steps.
Question 130. In a group room, another staff member begins loudly discussing a client's toileting accident in front of the client and the other children. What is the best action? A. Answer the questions quietly so that the client cannot hear what is being said. B. Leave a note on the client's cubby so that all staff know what happened. C. Say nothing, since that staff member is not supervised by the RBT. D. Move the discussion to a private area, provide personal care out of view of others, and raise the concern with the supervisor if it continues.
The answer is D. Move the discussion to a private area, provide personal care out of view of others, and raise the concern with the supervisor if it continues. Client dignity and confidentiality are protected by controlling where and to whom information is shared. Personal care happens in private, and only the information a colleague actually needs is shared, in a setting where others cannot overhear.
Question 131. A client refuses to begin work. Another staff member suggests holding back the client's lunch until he cooperates. What is the best action? A. Withhold lunch briefly, then provide it whether or not the client cooperates. B. Follow the suggestion, since lunch is clearly a powerful reinforcer for this client. C. Ask the parent for permission to use lunch as a reinforcer. D. Do not withhold the meal. Use the reinforcers identified in the plan and report the suggestion to the supervisor.
The answer is D. Do not withhold the meal. Use the reinforcers identified in the plan and report the suggestion to the supervisor. Food, drink, and access to the bathroom are basic needs and protected rights, not items to be made contingent on compliance, and withholding them is a harm regardless of how briefly it is done or who agrees to it.
Question 132. At a school meeting, a teacher introduces the RBT to the team as the behavior analyst who designed the child's program. What is the best action? A. Accept the introduction and clarify her actual role privately with the teacher afterwards. B. Politely correct the description, state that she implements the plan under a supervisor's direction, and refer program questions to the supervisor. C. Use the meeting to explain the reasoning behind the program so the team sees her competence. D. Say nothing during the meeting so the teacher is not embarrassed.
The answer is B. Politely correct the description, state that she implements the plan under a supervisor's direction, and refer program questions to the supervisor. An RBT must not make or allow misleading statements about her qualifications, and letting an inflated title stand in front of a team is allowing one.
Practice every one of these questions free at quibank.com. The link is in the description.